Hey, well, I see that y'all can hear the little bit of background music. I hope it's not too loud. Hi, Diane, Michael, and I'm guessing from Diane you said hi to Liz, so I'm guessing Liz is on here. That track that you're actually listening to is actually one of the tracks that I use in the meditation series that I've been working on for the last couple of years. Um, I figured I better play it safe than sorry and play a background track that I actually own the rights to instead of taking a chance of getting in some type of legal trouble since this is being broadcast. So I see Diane said you had the best day to Michael. That's good. I've been trying to keep up with some of the posts in the group and stuff. This is still trying to get used to this, and I can't be on there as much as I would like to right now. But I am very grateful and very thrilled that you guys are already starting to get some use out of the community. Um, and of course, as I said in yesterday's email, those of you that have signed up for this, and anyone else who signs up before the end of Friday, irregardless of anything new moving forward, you guys will remain members of the Ask It Basket community for as long as it's up and running. So as we move forward and we get a little bit more into this, I hope that if there's any specific issues or questions that arise or anything that you'd like to see more of in the group and stuff, please feel free to let me know. We'll give a few more minutes, see if anybody else pops in. I'm going to check over and make sure that I didn't miss any sign-ups of anybody. Just to be on the safe side. So let's see. In the meantime, feel free to keep chatting amongst yourselves as I go through and make sure that I didn't miss anybody coming into this. It doesn't look like I did. So, with that, if we are ready, then I will try to move forward. Actually, I missed quite a bit, quite a few things, Diane, especially if you talk to my wife. She'll tell you I miss little details all the time. All right, I see Liz. All right. Apologize, guys. Like I said yesterday or Monday, actually, as I watch the feed through here, and I try to watch the comments and stuff, what I receive from you guys is a little delayed from what I'm actually saying and stuff. So there's about a 15 to 20 second delay, which doesn't seem like much, but when you're on this end of it, it's a little weird to get used to. Anyhow, let's go ahead and get started if everybody's ready. Okay, so I told you guys that I was going to share a little bit more about my background as far as why I became so intrigued and so wrapped up in breathing, and more specifically with the wind. Now, a couple of you may have already, read something about this in one of my posts, or has heard me share this before. When I was about 16 years old, I went to a broken down fishing lodge in a place called Whitney, Texas. I know some of you that are on here are familiar with it. The main ones that are chatting in the group, of course, know the place. For future reference, just in case there's anyone who is not familiar with Redwood, give you a little image of it. This is a drawing I actually did sometime in the mid-90s. It was roughly, I would say, right around 92, right before I relapsed and started drinking again, actually. This was a sketch I did out of memory. I was actually writing a little chapbook that I never finished called Just a Thought, and I drew a few images of surrounded around Whitney and around the beginning of my belief system, where I came to believe in a higher power greater than myself. And this was just a sketch up I did, and it doesn't look anything like that now. It did look a bit more like this back in the late 80s and early 90s. Not quite as cliffy as I show it here, but once again, this was a drawing many years ago that I did out of my memory. I went to I went to this lodge in the spring of '86, and I was there for a recovery convention. I had heard all kinds of stories about this convention. At that time, the conventions were huge, and people from all over 3 states usually came every 3 months to this little broken fishing lodge. Back then it was called Redwood Lodge in Whitney, Texas. And the first night that I was there, we were actually staying in a hotel room in a nearby city. We called it the Thunder Chicken. It was actually called the Thunderbird Hotel. It was definitely a hole-in-the-wall roach motel. But back in the mid-'80s, when I first went to this place, it was a regular stay for us, and there was about 7 guys all sharing one room. So needless to say, a couple of guys crashed out on beds. a couple of us crashing out on the floor, and it was a very loud room. My first night there, I was extremely frustrated and extremely upset because of all the hype of what I'd heard about the conventions and stuff. And when I got there, it was this filthy, dirty, broken down fishing lodge. Everybody there was older than me. For anyone who doesn't know my backstory, my first time of facing my drug addiction, my alcoholism, was when I was strung out at the age of 15 back in '85. And yeah, I just gave my age away. But I went to this first convention. I was 16. I had roughly about 6 months clean and sober at the time. If you're familiar with the steps, I had been struggling with this whole concept of coming to believe in a power greater than myself. I was a very arrogant teenager, as actually Michael actually met me just a year or two after all of this, so he could attest to my ego from back then. But I was at this hotel with all these guys. It was the middle of the night, first night there. I was frustrated. I was literally I was pissed off. I didn't want to be there. Everybody was older than me. I was completely bummed out. All my expectations were blown, and I just didn't want to be there. So one of the guys that was staying in the room with us, he decided that the good idea to do was take a trip back up to the lodge, which was about 35 minutes away from the hotel. And so we drove back up to the lodge. We got back up there. It was the middle of the night, probably around 1:30. 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was very, very quiet, very, very dark, and there wasn't very many people around. But the guy I was with decided that we should go up to a place that's very, very well known at this lodge called Serenity Point. Serenity Point is very well known for anybody in 12-step fellowships in Texas. It's a point. If you look at that image that I showed earlier, what you're actually seeing is, as you wrap around the cliffs on the right side of that image, it leads up to these 12 steps that are little marble steps, which if you look at the cover page of Journey and Principles, that image that I use on my banner is actually a picture of the actual steps from Serenity Point. But for some reason it looks like my image has just flipped. I don't know what happened here. So give me a second. I'm trying to see. There we go. That's better. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So get up to Serenity Point, and it's a cliff. And as I was saying, there's these 12 steps that lead up to the top of it. Each step has a very simplified version of the 12 steps of recovery, a very generic version of them. And you get up to the top. There's a huge wooden cross. It's not as tall as it was back then because it's been vandalized a couple of times and been torn down and had to be rebuilt. But and it was in a different position in '86 than it is now. The cliff was a little bit different. Anyway, we get up to the top. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember very distinctly it was a solid gray overcast. And when you get up to the steps, you see the cross, and you literally walk past the cross to get to the edge of the cliff, and the cliff was a bit more defined back then. And we sat down on the edge of the cliff. At this point, the cross is behind us. And like I said, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, solid gray overcast, and there was floodlights on the ground that shined on the cross. And as we're sitting there on the edge of the cliff, there's a handful of other people up there. I want to say there's only like maybe six to eight people hanging out up at the point at that time. There weren't very many. And we're sitting at the edge of the cliff, and I'm sitting there whining and complaining and pointing out everything that was wrong, and how everybody had lied to me about how great the convention was supposed to be. And this other gentleman who was there that evening came over, and he sat next to me. I don't remember what his name was, but he sat next to me. He introduced himself, and he was staring up at the sky. He made the comment, he was like, "Have you ever seen anything so amazing?" And I was like, wondering what he was talking about. And I looked up at the sky. And when I looked up at the sky, what he was looking at was the floodlights on the cross had casted a giant shadow of a cross up on the clouds. And when I first looked up, I saw, in my mind, what I saw was basically a silhouette of an image of a person with their arms wide open. And at that moment, I stood up on the edge of the cliff. Now, this was a sketch that I did for that book that I was working on in the early 90s. Once again, this is more of just a rough general sketch that I did from memory as I was working on this chapbook called Just a Thought. But it gives you somewhat of an idea of what I saw that night. Anyway, I stood up on the edge of the cliff, and when I stood up on the edge of the cliff and I looked up a second time, what I saw was just the shadow of the cross. The second time I looked up was just the shadow of the cross, but at that moment in time, a huge breeze blew by, and my hair was fairly long at that time as well. I've almost always had long hair ever since my mom said that I could have it as long as I wanted to, as long as I took care of it. And the wind blew very strong, and in a moment, and seriously, in an instantaneous moment, a flood of thought came to me. I finally realized, the whole struggle. I didn't grow up in a religious family. I grew up in a family that we went to church when my grandmother felt healthy enough to go. We grew up in a Methodist church. We grew up with the same pastor my whole childhood. The pastor didn't rotate out like they do in a lot of churches. But we didn't, it was never forced upon me. I actually grew up going to many different churches with my friends and stuff as well. So I was always very open and broad with my religious upbringing. So I was more agnostic when I first got into 12-step fellowships. I always kind of felt like there was something there, but I was the type of person that if I couldn't see it, I couldn't touch it, I didn't want to believe in it. And that night when that wind blew and I'm looking up at this shadow of a cross up on the sky, it hit me. I had always believed in something I had never seen and I've never touched. No one has. And that was the wind, the air. In that moment, at that time, I became very, very aware of believing in something that I had absolutely no control over, something that no one has ever seen, yet no one has ever questioned its existence, no matter where you come from, what language you speak. No one questions the existence of the air or the wind. And in that moment, I understood. I could see its effects on everything around me, the trees moving, the leaves blowing around, my hair getting in my eyes. I could lock myself away from it. All I have to do is go indoors, but it's still there. We can't control the wind. We can try to direct it. We can try to imitate it. We can attempt to create it, but we're not really creating it. We're just using devices to amplify it and direct it. And, that is the one thing that connects everyone, every living creature. Every living creature that we know of on the face of this earth all have to breathe in some form or another. Whether they're breathing in oxygen and out carbon dioxide, or breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen, we are literally all connected in some way, form, or fashion through the air that we breathe. And the fascinating thing is as I have journeyed through this fascination with the wind and with the air, almost every known belief system that has a story of creation starts with the breath of life. Almost every single one of them. And I say almost only because I'm not a professor. I don't have an unlimited knowledge of all the different beliefs in the world. I've studied many different ones. I've touched on many different ones, and mainly in specific areas. A good example is the Native Americans. They believe that life begins the moment you take your first breath. That prior to the actual moment after birth that you inhale that first breath of life, you're still just in the, basically, for a crude way to put it, and ladies forgive me, in the factory being made, pretty much. That the actual life force, the spirit, ether, essence, chi, whatever you want to call it, that the true existence of life itself happens with the first breath. I know there's a couple of other cultures out there that have similar belief systems to that, but the Native American is the one I'm familiar with. And to me, that's a very interesting concept. Now, that's not to jump into any philosophical, moral debates on pro-life or not pro-life. I don't plan to get on into any of that. The point is the wind, the air that we breathe, the intricacy and the importance, and how little thought we give to such a simple act. Breathing is the one thing that we both do, both consciously and subconsciously. We breathe naturally, without thinking about it, without thought. We breathe when we sleep. We breathe when we, believe it or not, we breathe when we eat. In martial arts, learning to breathe as you're sparring, or as you're doing your kata, or as you're doing your moves is extremely important. In any exercise, in any exertion, and like we talked about Monday, it's so easy for our breathing to become unhealthy, and yet we have control over our breathing. It's an automatic response, but at the same time, we can control it. We can choose to hold our breath for at least 2 to 3 minutes. We can choose to hold our breath longer than that, and if we're not conditioned, it will be the last time we hold our breath, but it's a choice. So breathing is one of the only things that we both do consciously and subconsciously. And that night at Serenity Point, that understanding, the ability to understand that there was something that completely connects us, that connects everybody, that has no moral compass to it. It simply is. air. It's there. We all breathe it. We all rely on it. None of us can survive without it. It has the ability to destroy, but at the same time, it can be used for great benefit. And every argument, every definition that I have ever come across with the idea or concept of a higher power, for me, air and breathing fits the bill, and it gives me my connection. It makes me connected. And that's why I became so enthralled with breathing and learning to breathe properly. As I got more into studying the wind and studying the air, that's how I started learning just how important breathing differently is. I'm going to move ahead a little bit. When I left recovery, when I relapsed and I started using again and drinking again, I actively stayed under the influence pretty much straight for 9 years. And one of the things that kept me going during that time was, once again, it was the wind. I was always able to step outside, and at my most depressed times, when when I went through my first divorce, whenever I went to jail, the first thing I did when I got out was step outside and feel that wind. At the lowest points in my life, I always went to outside, and no matter what the temperature was like, no matter what the weather was like, when I really wanted to feel the wind touch me, I could step outside, and if I focused on it, if I thought about it, I could feel it. Until one evening, I was sitting in my loft. I had a really nice loft in Irving, Texas. It was after my oldest child, her mom and myself split up. We weren't legally married, but before we actually got legally married, my drinking ran her off. My child was about 1 year old when she kicked me out. And I found myself living in a one-bedroom loft, beautiful loft. The furniture I owned was 2 camping chairs, 2 folding chairs, a Fisher-Price keyboard that belonged to my daughter, a children's drum set, an old jam box, and a Commodore 64 computer. Now, granted, this was 91, 92. And I mean, not 91, 92, 01, 02, 2001, 2002. And I didn't have a bed. I slept on a pallet on the floor. I didn't have any of the other furniture. I didn't have a TV. I didn't have any of that stuff. I had myself, my dog, those 2 camping chairs, the keyboard, the kids' keyboard and drum set, and jam box, and that was it. Usually the only thing that was in my fridge was, of course, alcohol. And one night, I remember this really distinctly. One night, it was mid-August of 2002, and I hadn't paid rent in 2 months, and I hadn't worked in several weeks. This was during, I was a freelance stagehand at the time, and it was feast or fathom. And at that time, I was very much, at my bottom. Any penny, anything I got went towards buying alcohol, or keeping myself, thoughtless. I know several people here can relate to this, but I remember sitting out on that balcony. It's just me and Heidi, my dog, and we're sitting out on that balcony. I'm downing the last of the Red Dog I had, and the airplane flew over. I was right by DFW Airport. And for me, I always envision people, and airplanes flying over, or people, I'd watch, cars on the highway, and like image, people in the cars. And it always made me feel connected to the world, to kind of do this imagery and this, envision, what people are probably acting like and looking like. And this one moment, I'm sitting out on that balcony, and I couldn't picture anybody in that airplane. I'd already drank pretty much a full 12 pack, and I wasn't feeling drunk at all, and I couldn't feel the wind. I couldn't feel the air. It was perfectly still. I couldn't see, the trees weren't moving, and no matter how I focused on it, and I was out there for a good 15, 20 minutes. It felt like longer, trying to feel the wind, and I couldn't feel it. And for the first time in my life, I felt a complete void, a complete emptiness. I felt completely alone. For some reason, always growing up, I never really felt lonely, ever. Even when I was by myself, I never felt lonely. But that night, I felt a complete emptiness. The next day, I got the notice that I was being kicked out of my loft, and within a week, I had left everything pretty much behind except for my dog, and moved in with 2 other stagehands in North Richland Hills. And 2 months later, as some of you know, I got escorted off of a major corporate gig, and was blackballed from the industry. You get blackballed as a stagehand, you got a pretty big problem. And I, lo and behold, I've been sober ever since October 10th, 2002. But that moment that I lost the wind, it was like the complete opposite of that moment when I first found the wind in 86. So I share that just to share why learning to breathe became so important to me. Why learning to breathe properly. Why I have such a connection with the wind, with the air. Sounds like the storm's building up now, so this makes kind of for an interesting night for the storms to kick in with me telling this story. And I almost forgot about that again. We all go through lives to where we have those moments in our life that really stand out. Something dramatic happens. We fall in love. We lose love. We lose friendships. We all have these ebbs and these ebbs and tides, these flows, these ins and outs. We all have these ups and downs, and that's what makes us alive. When if you're hooked up to a heartbeat monitor, as long as that line's bouncing up and down with the highs and lows, you're still living. If it ever flatlines, then it's over. So we all go through these moments, and sometimes we hit these plateaus, and we start settling in, and we forget the basics that got us there. And I did that. I did that in recovery. I did that with several years sober this time around, and my focus became more on the general stuff that most people kind of think about. I gave way too much focus to my work. I'd gotten back into the industry, obviously, and was becoming very successful. Landed a full-time job with one of my then clients that actually played a part in me getting sober. And I got away from my basics, and my focus was not on my recovery. My focus was not on my relationship with my higher power, which I choose to see it as the wind and call it Dad. But I got away from it until uh, as I've shared before, last, on Monday, and I've written about quite a few times early on in Journey and Principles, when a very, very close friend and brother of mine passed away. There was a lot of deaths during 2012, and his being one of them, and an old mentor being another one, back to back, basically within a month of each other. And I went into a complete spiral. Um, and it wasn't until 2015 that I started trying to get back into basics, that I started picking up my breathing again, my conscious, focused work with breathing and with health in general. And I'll get more into the connection of what happened, in 2015 and the road between then and now on Friday. But for now, I felt like I needed to share why the wind and the air and breathing has become such an intricate part of my life and my recovery, the way I deal with my own mindset, the way I face life on life's terms. If it was not for the different techniques and breathing styles that I've learned over the years and stuff, I don't think I would be able to come across the way I do. I know I would not be capable of calming myself as much as I'm able to when I'm on top of it. My wife, I love her, but we wear activity monitors on our wrists that monitors our heart rate and our stress. And the poor little thing, her, a good day for her is her stress monitor is somewhere around 50 or 60 on a good day. I've seen it get down to 40, I think. And on mine, that's high. If mine's getting up to 50 or 60, then that's high stress for me nowadays. Mine's usually around 20. And I contribute a lot of it to to other things. I mean, I do try to practice principles in all of my aspects of life. My eating, my exercise, the martial arts, but breathing, as I said on Monday, there is absolutely nothing, in my opinion and in my experience, more important to my personal health than how I breathe. How I breathe changes how I feel. It can change how I think, and it can change how I sleep. Um, One of the things that my wife used to always get really frustrated with me when we were dating was I would go on such little sleep for several days. And I mean, I was clean and sober at the time, but it was between my work and hanging out in 12-step meetings and stuff, and the active life, I just didn't sleep that much, and she couldn't understand how I was able to function the way I did. And even then, I'd already learned and had struggled with insomnia and issues with sleeping for as long as I can remember. Honestly, I've always been someone that would sleep for many hours for one day, but then I could go several days without hardly sleeping at all, with or without any chemical help. Um, and a lot of it had to do with how I slept. Now my sleep is a lot more balanced out. After 11 years of marriage and 3 kids later, you know, I've definitely balanced my sleep out. I do have a somewhat regular schedule when I'm not in show. I have to be here at the office, so my sleep's gotten a lot easier. However, I still, on average, a good night's sleep for me is about 6-7 hours at the most. I mean, that's an awesome night's sleep for me. By the time we get the kids to bed and get everything straightened up around the house and do all the nightly, stuff to shut down our evening and pack my lunch for the next day and stuff, I'm happy if I can get to bed by midnight, 1 a.m. and I'm getting up, roughly around 7 a.m. to start doing my morning exercise and my morning routine to get ready to come into the office. Especially during the school year when I get up and help get the kids ready for school, because it helps me get up and get ready for work on time. But it's the quality of sleep, not quantity. I know we hear all the time how important it is to get a certain amount of sleep, but just as important, I have found for me, is how I fall asleep. If I fall asleep with my head full of all the what ifs that so many of us deal with, if I fall asleep with, if something happened during the day that is weighing down on my mind and I try to fall asleep that way, I may fall asleep out of pure exhaustion and, as we say, pass out instead of fall asleep. But what is going on in my mind affects how well I sleep at night. And I can definitely tell the difference. When I wake up the next day, whether I wake up groggy or not usually doesn't have anything to do with how much I sleep. It has to do with what was I thinking as I went to sleep. And inventorying, nightly journaling, all plays a part in helping clear our minds. Obviously, we read articles and hear all the time electronics is not a good idea as we go to bed. Don't fall asleep watching TV. Don't fall asleep, with the last thing that you looked at was a video game on your cell phone or Facebook, of all things that we're sitting here talking on Facebook. But it's also what are we thinking about as we fall asleep, and what is our breathing like? Once again, like we talked about on Monday, as I fall asleep, am I breathing deep? Am I breathing deeply into my lungs? Am I bringing that air down into my lungs and into my diaphragm and stuff, or am I breathing outwardly and very shallow and keeping the breathing up here? That can affect how well I sleep. And as I fall asleep, the calmer I can keep my heart and the quieter I can keep my mind, the more soothing and relaxed I feel. The more relaxed I feel, the easier it is for me to fall asleep. Just about anyone I've ever talked to about having difficulty falling asleep, with the exception, of course, and I know Michael can relate to this, having physical pain definitely can make it difficult to fall asleep and can definitely trigger heavy insomnia. I have been injured before, not quite like Michael, but I have had to battle falling asleep with injuries. I do have chronic hip pains from time to time, which is part of the reason why I continue to work martial arts and yoga and stuff to try to counteract that as I get older. But learning to quiet our thoughts, quiet our emotions as we lay down to go to sleep at night can make a big difference in how restful we feel the next morning. So tonight the technique that I want to share with you guys, it's a technique that is known for helping with insomnia. It's known for relaxing you and bringing calm, but it operates in a little different setting than the box breathing does. This breath is, once again, it's got several names. It's another breath that David G talks about in one of his seminars a lot. It's known as the quiet continuous breathing. It's also known as a softening breath, or I've heard it referred to as the infinity breath. It's a very easy, simple breath. This one, Belinda, you do predominantly want to do in through your nose and out through your nose. And the reason why is because it is considered a quiet breath. And it's easier to have a quiet breath when it's in and out through your nose than it is to breathe out quietly through your mouth. It's very simple. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. So all you're doing with this is, and you know, by all means, like I said, do this lying down as you lay down at night. You could do it sitting up. You could do it anytime during the day, but it is really well known for helping you calm your mind and calm your heart and prepare you for sleep. If you're laying down in a dark room, that automatically kicks in the natural melatonin in your system. And so if you do that and you start this breath and you do this breath until you relax enough to fall asleep, it helps it deepen the sleep that you have. But it's just a very simple in and out breath. So what you want to do is you want to gently breathe in through your nose and then breathe out through your nose. And then breathe in through your nose and breathe out through your nose. And the key is to do it in a flowing, continuous cycle. So your exhale flows into your inhale, and your inhale flows into your exhale, and it's non-stop. There is no pause. There is no holding your breath. You simply slowly breathe in through your nose, and then you breathe out through your nose. And you try to breathe softly enough to where you are not creating any sound at all. You don't hear your breath as it leaves, and you don't hear your breath as it enters in. It just flows in and then flows out. And sometimes it helps. I don't know if you can see it quite on my screen. I'll raise up a little bit. But sometimes it helps if, as you're breathing, you kind of picture the infinity sign. So you breathe in and then breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. And it just flows, just non-stop, continuous, as quietly, as softly, and as silently as you can breathe. And if you do that, as you lay down, your mind becomes once again focused on how you're breathing. And in becoming focused on how you're breathing, whatever troubles you have throughout the day, they start to subside. If for some reason something keeps popping back into your mind, into your thoughts, if that pain becomes throbbing, take your focus back to that breath. Try to follow it. And do that as you fall asleep. And see how well you sleep. See how well your sleep is. See how you wake up the next day. See what kind of mood you find yourself in the next day. Try that. do that tonight. And continue to try to be focused on, how you're breathing throughout the day. By all means, keep using the box breath when needed or when wanted, and when you think about it. When do you do a box breath? When you're anxious, when you're about to be anxious, and when you think about it. But try this tonight. Try this as you're laying down. I can't promise it'll take all the pain away, Michael, but at least it may help. Become a bit more bearable. If nothing else, it should help quiet your mind, help relax you, and help you fall into a deeper sleep, hitting that alpha state of sleep a little bit easier. Once again, I'm looking forward to hearing how tonight goes, how this evening goes, and how well you sleep tonight if through practicing this and trying this. Yes, Belinda, windpipes are beautiful. Forgive me, guys. I'll have to go back and read back through your comments, because I have to admit tonight I kind of got really into telling my background and my story, so I wasn't able to keep up with any of your comments and stuff. But I'll go back through and keep an eye on them and read through them. I'm actually looking forward to it. I'm really enjoying doing this. Once again, feel free to keep sharing this with people. It's not too late for them to sign up. I will be working on the replay. I think I figured out part of the problem with it was in doing a test run. I had my setup to be private, so only I could see it, so I could test my system. And I think when you do the replay, it goes back to that profile, and I have to switch it off of that public and make sure that I make it public. Thanks, Diane. I'm very grateful for you being here. I really am, and for all of your input. For tonight, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Once again, we went a little bit longer, not quite as long as we did Monday. Of course, it didn't take me 24 minutes to get into it this time. But feel free to hit me up. Keep messaging me if you have any questions. And guys, keep sharing what you're sharing. I love jumping on there and seeing you guys communication and chatting with each other. It's great. It really is. I'll chime in as much as I can when I can. Like I said, if you have any specific questions, feel free to pop them at me. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer, but I could probably lead you at least in a direction. And it doesn't have to be just about breathing. Hopefully this community will also lead into more discussions about living by principles, spiritual principles. I'll be honest with you, I'm going to be talking more and more about meditation as time goes on. Anyway, once again, I enjoyed this. I look forward to chatting with you throughout the day tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you guys again on Friday, and look forward to hearing your experience with the infinity breath. Until tomorrow and Friday, don't hold your breath. Bye, guys.